right, I think we can start now. First, welcome everyone. So, I'm Nicola Martinelli, part of the infrastructure team, and today we're gonna see how to host your Odoo server on the public internet and what you should and what you shouldn't do. So, once you have a service which is open to the public, you are gonna face a lot of challenges. And the first one is that the users are going to be out of control. So they are going to be out of your control. What does that mean? You can have like thousands, hundreds, thousands of visitors coming at the same time, visiting your website at the same time. You can also have some internal users doing stupid things, such as opening 20 tabs and printing 20 heavy PDFs at the same time. And so you will need to make sure that your installation can handle this kind of situation. And so you will need to tune the resources. You're going to face attacks. So that's pretty much guaranteed as soon as you have a service which is open to the public. It's deny of service, brute force, credential stuffing, exploits. I mean, you will get them. We get them like every day. So it's very important that you have a system which is secure. And finally, there is always a risk of data loss. It can be a human mistake, it can be a hardware failure. You must have backups. So, before moving forward, if you have any questions, there is a Q&A at the end. If you want to write down your question, just feel free to do it, and I will have a look at that at the end. I'm also available after the talk, just in case. First thing you need to think about is to keep your system up to date. That sounds pretty basic, but really, you have to keep your operating system up to date. Keep the Odoo installation up to date. I mean, every week there are security fixes which are pushed either in your operating system or in Odoo. So just please make sure that in your deployment procedure you have the update of the system which is taken into account. Once it's considered what's taken into account, let's see what we can do from an architecture perspective. So you know that Odoo is a multi-tier software. It means that there is the Odoo process, there is the Postgres database, there is the file store. And so you have these three components, and there are two ways, let's say, of installing it. First thing is that the simple one is to put everything on the same machine. The other one is to put each service, Odoo, Postgres, and the file store, on different servers. Actually, at Odoo, or let's say for the SaaS, we are going for the simple one. We just put everything on the same machine. It's actually simple, but it remains efficient. So with that in mind, let's see what we need to do. First thing is that you will need to use HTTPS. That's the very first step of any service. You need to use HTTPS. So Odoo doesn't support HTTPS. So that means you will need a fourth component. So you will need a reverse proxy. Here, for example, I took Nginx because that's the one we are using at Odoo, but any reverse proxy will make the job. And the idea behind your architecture, behind your installation, is that all the components, Odoo, Postgres, and file store, will not be reachable from the outside. So everything in red here cannot be reached from the outside, and all the connections must be done through the reverse proxy. The reverse proxy, Nginx in this case, will forward the request to Odoo. So that's a simple architecture, but it has a couple of advantages. The first one is being the simpler it is, the less there is risk of misconfiguration. Because the more complex your installation will be, the more chance you have to make a mistake somewhere and leave something open. So if it's simple, then you don't have to worry too much about taking care of all the security aspects. And moreover, if you have a hardware failure, a failover is way easier. If you have a simple deployment mechanism with a simple installation procedure, then it's easy to failover on another machine. So with that in mind, let's see what we can do at the Odoo and Nginx level to make things a bit more secure and tuned to our needs. So the first thing you need to do with Odoo is to make it more secure, because the default options are developer friendly, but really they are not production ready. You need to deactivate or at least protect the database manager. So from the database manager, you can back up a database, you can delete a database. So backupping a database, that means that anybody with access to this page can download the production data. That's clearly something you don't want to be open to the public. So you can at least deactivate it with the no database list option, or at least you protect it with a password. But better to just deactivate it. Then you can use the DB filter. So on the same machine, you can have more than one database. You can have the production database, a couple of copies, tests, and stuff. And so you can use the DB filter option to only serve your production database. Then just remember that Odoo should not be accessible from the outside world. So all the requests should come from Nginx. So the Odoo process should only listen to localhost. And linked to this, there is the proxy mode. So in order to retrieve the real IP addresses of the users and the visitors, you will need to use the proxy mode of Odoo in combination with some configuration at the reverse proxy level. More on that later. And finally, redirect the logs to a proper file, use logrotate or whatever tool you want for archiving. So these are a couple of options that are necessary for production use. But what about tuning the available resources? Because by default, Odoo will run on a single CPU. It's a single process service. So what you want to do is to use the multiprocess or the worker mode of Odoo. In the worker mode, what you have is that one request, one HTTP request, is processed by one worker on one CPU. What does that mean? It means that if you have 10 workers, you can process 10 requests at a time. These are synchronous requests. So once a worker is busy with a request, it's not doing anything else. What you will have to do is to define some memory limits, so you are sure that one given worker isn't using all the memory, and define a CPU time limit. Because as I said, when a worker is busy with one request, it doesn't accept more than one request, it doesn't do anything else. So if you have requests which are taking too much time, then your system will quickly become clogged. So I would say a decent value here is maybe 1 minute, 2 minutes, and still it should be exceptions. If you have many requests taking that long, it's probably some stuff that you need to tune at the level of Odoo at the code, for example. So for example, that's what we use here for the SaaS, so a typical trial server that we have. So we replicate this kind of configuration on our 500 machines. So we have Odoo and Postgres on the same machines. We have 9 HTTP workers, 1 cron worker for the schedule actions, so that makes 10 CPUs, 10 workers dedicated to Odoo. We have 6 for Postgres. Each worker can take 3.2 gigabytes of RAM, so that makes for 10 workers half of the RAM is dedicated to Odoo. And that gives you an idea of a fair resource allocation, let's say, for installing everything on one server. So once you have that, you have an installation which is more secure and which can use all the resources of the server. You have to configure nginx. And once again, any reverse proxy should do the trick here. First thing is, of course, to activate HTTPS. That's the main reason why we introduced nginx in the first place. It was to use HTTPS, so it's SSL here. You can also activate HTTP2. It's not required, but still it's compatible. No worry with that. You need to forward some headers. So remember the proxy mode of Odoo. I told you, yeah, it's gonna read some headers coming from nginx. That's the configuration here, so it's something pretty standard for any reverse proxy, is to fill the headers with the real IP address of the client. X-forwarded host, for example here. The WebSocket part, so I won't go into the details of the WebSocket. You just know that it runs on a separate worker, a G-event worker, and the worker doesn't listen on the same port than Odoo. So Odoo, the default port is 8069 here, and the G-event worker will listen to the 8072 port. So you need to make sure to redirect the WebSocket controller to the 8072 port. There is also some extra configuration which is specific for WebSockets. Once again, it's pretty standard configuration for any WebSocket service. So if you are more interested, just go to the nginx documentation for that. And with that, we have something which is pretty safe to be open to the public. There are a couple of extra things that we can do with Odoo. And first is to take the advantage of the multi-tenant capabilities. So if you have more than one customer, you can run multiple databases on a single Odoo process. An easy way to do it is to use the %d placeholder with the db filter option. It's kind of a magic placeholder that's, so if you try to access mycompany.com, it will redirect the request to the My Company database. So that's a simple and efficient way to share the resources, but just pay attention that Odoo doesn't handle any fairness in the resources allocation. So it just first come, first served. If you have a database with thousands of customers, thousands of users, and a database with a few users, then the small database will be impacted by the large one. So it's always nice to have that in mind when you start using the multi-tenant capabilities of Odoo. You can also define some extra safety nets to go a step forward in the security of your installation. The most basic one is to use a dedicated user. I mean, don't run the service as root. That's also a standard way of doing stuff, but use a dedicated user for the service. And at Odoo, we don't use containerization, but we use the systemd sandboxing for to enhance the security. So there are a couple of things that you can do. For example, protect home here, it will mount the file system as read-only. So the Odoo process has access to the file system, but only in read-only. You will have, of course, to define some write paths, such as the file store or the log path. Obviously, Odoo needs to write some files. You can make some paths inaccessible. So if you have more than one service running with specific configuration, maybe you can just protect this configuration from Odoo. You can make the temp folder private. You can avoid, forbid privilege escalations and stuff. There are many other configuration here, configuration options you can really do. Go to the system demand page and read them all. It's really interesting. Review your firewall and the controller rules. As we saw previously, only nginx should be accessible. So just close everything but the SSH and HTTP port. Close the 8069 port, close the 5432 port of Postgres. There is no need to keep them open. If you make a misconfiguration at some point and you leave a door open, at least the firewall is closed. Protect the sensitive access points. I talked about the database manager. That's something you can protect thanks to an nginx rule, but also the XMLRPC rules. XMLRPC is used for user scripts. If you don't want to authorize user scripts on your server, just block the endpoints. And if you don't block the endpoint, at least define a rate limiting on it. Because the naive way of writing a script is to do a loop which is going to make requests over and over and over to your server. That's the naive way of doing it. So you need to put in place a rate limiting. So it's an example of rate limiting with nginx. So 1 request per second with a burst. So burst allows you to go over the 1 request per second for a short period of time, let's say. So that's a simple configuration to define rate limiting, so to prevent deny of service, brute force attack, and such. Finally, at the level of Postgres, you should use an unprivileged user. I mean, the user should be allowed to create tables, create indexes, delete tables, but not create database or delete database. It doesn't need to create or delete database on a production server. And last but not least, the weakest link is often the user. There is always Bob from accounting with his password written on a post-it stuck to his screen. You can use some Odoo features to harden the security. So you can enforce the two-factor authentication. So you can enforce it either for all users or only for employees. Can be useful. And as of Odoo 18, the passkeys are supported. So it's a way to connect to Odoo without a password. So a passwordless connection mechanism. So for example, if you are using YubiKeys, you can use the YubiKey to store the passkey with Odoo. And yeah, offsite backups. That's maybe the last thing I'm gonna say today is please do daily offsite backups. At some point you will have a data loss. It can be a human mistake, hardware failure, you don't know. But if you have a daily backup which is stored offline, at least you have something to come back to in case of major issue. Don't store the backup on the production server. That's really the basic mistake that you can do with the backups is storing them on the same machine. Don't do that. Store them offsite. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So let's see if we have some questions. On-prem versus cloud version, is there a difference? Well, not really. Well, on the cloud version, we obviously have community and enterprise. We have enterprise. We don't have community only. On-prem, you can have the community installed only, but there is no difference between the two versions, on-prem or cloud. Obviously, on the cloud version, it's a shared hosting. So you need to share the resources with other customers, while on-prem, you have all the resources to yourself. Really depends on the sizing, I would say. Download enterprise version. You cannot download v14 enterprise from download page. Oh. Oh. Download page anymore. It's probably because we don't update it anymore. I didn't know it was not available at all. But it's probably not available at all. But what's actually weird, I was thinking that it should still be available, so I'm gonna see with the team if there is a reason why we don't have it anymore. But it should be there. But please be aware that it's not gonna be compatible with the latest operating system versions. So if you run the v14, you're gonna have to use an outdated operating system to make it run. Do you suggest to use Docker? We don't, so I'm not going to suggest it since we don't use it. It's a matter of preference, I think. What about implementing Odoo on Kubernetes? Should we keep each pod simple with 4 service or break it down? I don't know much about Kubernetes infra. First thing you have to think is that why do you need Kubernetes? You really need Kubernetes. That shouldn't be, in my opinion, a de facto choice to use Kubernetes. But yeah, that's also a matter of preference, I think. Why Nginx not Apache? Some guys saying Nginx is better. Yeah, well, to be honest, I've used both. For some reason, when I joined Odoo, they were already using Nginx, and we didn't really in the idea of changing it. I don't know if there is really a major advantage of using Apache or another one such as Caddy or I don't know, other reverse proxy. HA proxy, for example, could be useful. We use it in a different use case, but that's different. It's not only a reverse proxy, but also a load balancer. And HA proxy is much better at load balancing than Nginx, actually. No trafic non plus at all. If you suggest Docker, I don't suggest Docker. But what we do actually on the SaaS is we have one Odoo version on one server because of dependencies, Python dependencies and stuff. Because if you are a bit, if you know virtual env and so on, you know that at some point it's gonna be a mess. And so we have the size that at the size where we can afford having just one version on one machine. So that's mainly the reason we can afford to do it. Is 5 minutes for CPU time limit too much? What's best practice? Well, if you have too many requests taking 5 minutes, then that's not gonna work. I mean, yes, you can leave it 5 minutes, and but if you have too many requests like this, then it's gonna be an issue. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And I'm running out of time, so that's perfect. Later.